correct? Now, sentence arrangement basically means that 4 sentences, or rather I would say that one sentence is given to you, and that one sentence is broken down into 4 different fragments, correct? So basically one whole sentence broken down into 4 different fragments, and the question asks you to arrange those fragments in a logical order, right? So I will read the instruction for you. This is the instruction, as you all see. It says a sentence has been broken down into 4 fragments. Arrange the fragments in the logical order to form a meaningful logical sentence. So this topic is one of the most important topics for CUET English section, that is section A, and a good number of questions come from sentence arrangement. So we don't have 4 different sentences as you see in the other exam. You just have one sentence, and that one sentence is broken down into 4 different parts, and then we have to arrange those parts to form a single meaningful idea. Now the thing that is different in the exam is you are given options in the exam, but I have not given the options because I want to make it a bit more creative, and it arouses your curiosity just to look at these 4 sentences, that which fragment will come first. So as you see here in the sentences, there is no capital letters, so you know that any of the fragment can start the paragraph. So when you read this, which fragment do you think will open the paragraph? For example, it says have begun collaborating. So you don't start your sentences have begun. Neither do you start your sentences with are linked. So the possibility of opening the sentence is with fragment C or fragment D. In other words, if you want to open the paragraph or open the sentence, not the paragraph, if you open the sentence, you are not going to open the sentence with fragment A or fragment B. You will start with C or with D. And D says to investigate how genomic differences among human beings. So again, this is not making sense. When you read C, it says over the past decade, economists, sociologists, so this is a slightly strong spelling here, it should be O. So over the past decade, economists, sociologists, and psychologists. So what do you think? Over the past decade, economists, sociologists, and psychologists, something, right? So can I say that C looks like a good opening for this arrangement? What will come next? Now the point is that if you move from C to D, does not make sense. Psychologists to investigate is not making as much sense, but when you say psychologists have begun collaborating with geneticists, so the fragment C along with A makes a very good logical meaning, right? So you say that over the past decade, economists, sociologists, and psychologists have begun collaborating with geneticists, correct? What next? And why they are collaborating? To investigate how genomic differences among human beings are linked to differences in their behavior. So basically, when you say are here, this is a verb and it needs a subject, and the subject is this, correct? So how do we have the sequence? We have CA, and then you, just a moment, I think. Come far ahead. Okay, so what do we have? CA, and then we have D, and then in the end we have, correct? So this is the right sequence. How do we say that over the past decade, economists, sociologists, and psychologists have begun collaborating with genetists to investigate how genomic differences among human beings are linked to differences in their behaviors and social outcomes. So this way, the entire sentence becomes meaningful, and this is what we call as sentence arrangement. It's very simple. You just have to try different combinations. In fact, you don't need the options, because if you have the options, then you lose more time in evaluating which option is correct. You directly start with the sentence which you feel will open, and then start creating the links, and you will get the best sequence after that. Let's go and take the next question now. And this question says, is the slimmest. Of course, you won't start your sentence with the verb is directly. And again, this is that. So just a moment. So this word that nature is most competitive. Again, it's difficult. I mean, it's not logical to open the sentence either with A or B. So C says when the comparative fitness between competitors, again, he does not look like a good opening of the sentence. Evolution has taught us the brutal fact. So this can be a very good way of opening the sentence. Why? Because you are starting with something, and Now just check what can come after this. So there has to be something here. Evolution has taught us the brutal fact. What is that fact? The fact must come, correct? Evolution has taught us the brutal fact, and that fact has been presented to you with this, that. So when you say, I know that India is the second most populated country of the world, so you say, I know, and then you say that. And that basically means something more is going to come, right? So evolution has taught us the brutal fact that nature is most competitive when the comparative fitness between competitors is the slimmest. You know? So this is when, not where. So again, this needs to be justified. When you say evolution has taught us the brutal fact that nature is most competitive, again, from B to A does not make sense. So you would put C in between. So it goes like this. You have D, correct? Then you have B, then you have C, and then you have A. You can read it now. It says here, evolution has taught us the brutal fact that nature is most competitive when the comparative fitness between competitors is the. So this becomes the right sequence. Very, very easy. These questions are very easy. You can finish all these questions in a very short amount of time. So we have the next question now. And again, you have to look for something which is likely to start the paragraph. Start the sentence, not the paragraph. So it says a handful of physiologists. Okay, sounds good. A handful of physiologists, correct? And then it says started to speculate about the existence, correct, of chemical messengers that would act within the body. And then you'd say from the mid-19th century. So there's a comma here. Now the point is that you might put this at the end, but if it comes at the end, then can it end with a comma? That's the reason why we have deliberately put the comma at the end, to indicate that this sentence is not going to end the paragraph, because if it ends the paragraph, it will never have a comma at the end. That means it must come somewhere at the start, correct? So now we have got partial sequence. We have said that a handful of physiologists, correct, started to speculate about the existence of what? Of chemical messengers that would act within the body, correct? So we have DAC. Now the point is, you can put B here or you can put B. But the fact is that because B ends with a comma, we can't end the sentence with a comma. We need to end the sentence with a full stop, right? So it's better to put B at the start. That becomes a logical way of putting the whole fragment. So it says from the mid-19th century onwards, comma, a handful of physiologists started to speculate about the existence of chemical messengers that would act within the body. So this becomes a logical sequence and the right. I hope you are able to understand and connect with this. Let's go and take the next question. So this question is question number 4, and again the comma has come, but then doesn't mean that comma, if the comma comes, then it has to be at the start of the sentence. It can also come in between. So be very careful. But how are we going to go ahead? So this says was etched in stone. The importance of two-way interaction. So when you have interaction, you always have interaction between people, right? So the interaction is always between people. So how does it go? It says here that the importance of two-way interaction between the brain and the immune system. So you can say that C and A are connecting in a very logical and smooth way. So you say the importance of two-way interaction between the brain and the immune system was etched in stone, correct? And then you can't put in the 1970s at the end. So if B comes here, D does not make sense because it looks quite awkward. So D has to be here. This sequence makes much more sense. So you say in the 1970s, correct, the 1970s, the importance of two-way interaction between the brain and the immune system was etched in stone. That makes a perfect sequence. Quite logical, and the flow is quite correct. Now this in the 1970s becomes a bone of this in the 1970s becomes a bone of contention. It can come at the start, it can come at the end, but because of the comma, we haven't put it at the end, we have put it at the start, and this becomes a logical order. Let's go and take the next question. Okay, so again, similar kind of arrangement, but we have to understand how are we going to go ahead with this. This is the fifth question, right? So it says too often ends up, and it says to explain their behavior, absolving their actions. Which sentence do you think is most, which fragment do you think is most likely to open the sentence? That becomes a very interesting question, right? How are we going to go ahead? So it says invoking men's biology, right? Invoking men's biology too often ends up. Okay, so invoking men's biology to explain their behavior. So you invoke something with a certain purpose. So for example, you know, lots of people invoke. To invoke basically means to trigger or to open up. So when you invoke men's biology, there must be a purpose behind that invocation. So invoking men's biology to explain their behavior. This becomes a proper sequence. So invoking men's biology to explain their behavior too often ends up doing what? So again, this ends up needs something. This ends up needs something, and this something is there in, so sorry, DB. So here we not have this. I've just made. So it should be, this is wrong. It should be D, B, and then A, then B. So how does it go here? Invoking men's biology to explain their behavior too often ends up absolving their actions. You must understand the meaning of the word absolving. Absolving basically means to free from guilt. Suppose if you have been suppose you have been blamed of something, but you are not the person who has done, or not to be blamed for that. And if you are basically, you know, if you come out of that blame, then you are absolved of it. So for example, it happens many a time that in legal cases, someone, you know, you are caught in a legal case and you have been blamed for something, but then the court says that you are not to be blamed, you are innocent. That means you have been absolved. Absolved basically means to free someone from some sort of blame. That is the meaning of the word absolve. The right sequence is, let's go and take the next. So this is the sixth question, right? Sixth question here. So we have finished 5 questions. Look at this question. Correct? It says a feeling grew. So a feeling grew. Can I say it might have grown somewhere, or it is likely to have grown somewhere? Right? So when you say a feeling grew here, it is like a feeling grew where? In the pit of my stomach. So you can start with C, which says a feeling grew in the pit of my stomach. Correct? But before that, something can come. The universe really is a, okay, the universe is really is a pretty mysterious place. A feeling grew. So here we don't have a proper sequence. We can end up like this here, that a feeling grew in the pit of my stomach, and this that going to connect with this part of the sentence, because this that needs something to come. What we had done earlier is we had fixed C and A. A feeling grew in the pit of my stomach that. What is that feeling? That the universe really is a pretty mysterious place. Correct? So we have gone from C to A, and then from A to D, and then in the end we have CADB is the right sequence and creates a very logical sentence. So what we are doing here is we are trying to basically look at the end part of the sentence, and when we look at the end, we try to fix something from the other part such that the end is basically carried forward, and that's the best way of arriving at the sequence. In fact, you should not look at the options much, and once you have found some sort of connection, immediately look at the options and try to find the answer. So the options just confirm your answer. Let's go and take the next one. Here we have the 7th question, correct, or 6th, yeah, 7th question now, and it says here, in his book on the origin of species, Okay, so here you have in his book, and it says whatever path scientists have taken to look for. Okay, so here we have a comma. So this becomes a very, very important indicator. Here also we have a comma. Okay, so how are we going to go ahead? So suppose if you start with in his book on the origin of species, if you start with this, it doesn't go anywhere, because if you try to put anything after C, it doesn't gel, correct? It becomes a bit difficult. Let's try to see if we can put something after D. Whatever path scientists have taken, correct? Whatever path scientists have taken, scientist is not Darwin, so you cannot put C after D. Okay, whatever path scientists have taken, and they have taken what? To look for life's origins. You start with D, right? You say that whatever path scientists have taken to look for life's origins, correct? Whatever path scientists have taken to look for origins, most look. So this most is referring to whom? Majority of the scientists. So you can go with A then. And then finally you will have C. So let's try to understand if this is making sense. Whatever path scientists have taken to look for life's origins, correct? Most look to the ideas of Charles Darwin. And where? In his book on the origin of species. So this in his book on the origin of species will make sense only when you talk about Charles Darwin. So that one thing is very clear, that after you have talked about Charles Darwin, you talk about his book. You can't talk about his book first and then you say that his person is Charles Darwin, right? So can I say AC is a logical pair and DB is a logical pair, and from DB to AC it makes perfect sense, and that is what we call as logic. So it says here, whatever path scientists have taken to look for life's origins, most look to the ideas of Charles Darwin in his book on the origin of species. Perfect logical, right? So now we come to the 8th question. Here is the 8th question, and we need to again form a sequence. Let's try to understand what kind of sequence is possible. And lay down is basically a verb. So it is an action that is being performed by someone. So the fact that you have and lay down means something similar must have been done before. That's the reason why we have the conjunction and, correct? So you can't start with the verb. In English, sentences don't start with the verb, usually don't start. I mean, rare cases might have. So can I say that you can start with this because the comma has come? That means after this something is difficult. So late one summer night in 1949. So how did you start? You started by saying that late one summer night in 1949, the British archaeologist Decatur Hawkes. So can I say this is the person who is performing this action, right? Right? This is the person. So you can say like this, that the British archaeologist Decatur Hawkes went out into her small back garden in North London and lay down. So what did she do? She performed two actions. The first is that she went down, and the second is she went out, and the second is she lay down. So this is the sequence, right? So the British archaeologist Decatur Hawkes went out into her small back garden and lay down. So DBA makes perfect sense and creates a logical flow. Now the point is, should you have C at the end or should you have it at the start? This is again a classical case where I say that because it is ending in comma, it cannot come at the end, because you never end your sentences with comma. You end a sentence with full stop. So that means it has to come at the start. So C will come at the start, and this becomes a very logical sequence. You say that late one summer night in 1949, the British archaeologist Decatur Hawkes went out into her small back garden in North London, and it makes perfect logical sense, correct? Let's go and take the next question. A, B, C, D, right? So this might be a little challenging question because it is not very, it looks very simple. Now, before that, you must understand that what is the meaning of the word anthropology, right? So, you know, we have geological time scales. In geological time scales, we have different epochs and the names are given. So you would have heard of the epoch Miocene, correct? Some other, some other epochs, the Miocene, some other scene, this scene, that scene. So all these scenes shows that this is a sort of epoch dominated by some kind of animal. So when you say the Anthropocene, the word means means human being. This is the word anthro. So the word anthro means pertaining to humans. That's why when you look at the word anthropology, anthropologists study about human civilization or the beginning of human civilization. And also the word misanthrope, you must have heard this word before. I will just write word miss, M-I-S, miss, N-H-R-O-P. The word misanthrope. Now, who is a misanthrope? The one who hates mankind, does not like mankind. Anthropogenic, so something which is done with human beings. So when you say the Anthropocene, it basically means that something connected with humans, or in other words, the era of humans. Correct? So you can start with C and you can say that the Anthropocene or the era of the human denotes how industrial civilization has changed the earth in ways that are comparable with deep time processes. So it starts with C, it goes to B. The Anthropocene or era of the human denotes how industrial civilization has changed the earth and how it has changed in ways that are comparable with deep time processes. So you might ask, what is deep time process? Deep time basically means something that has changed over a very long period of time. So the changes that we have brought, we as humans have brought on the earth, can be compared with changes which nature brings over a long period of time. That is what we mean. So the extinction caused because of human factors can be caused by nature, but only in long interval. That is what it is trying to say. Correct? So I hope you have got the sequence is C, B, A, and D will come towards the end. And the word anthro, I hope you have understood what it means. Anthro means human beings, and pocene basically means era or time, because you have many eras and times given by this. So this is the question. CBAD is a sequence. Now this is the next question. It's a difficult question. Try to understand and see how can you solve this question. A slightly tricky one, but can be interesting nevertheless. Okay. Now this is a clue here in itself. What do you mean by in itself? In itself basically is used for emphasizing. So this word could be a clue to the right sequence. So if you look at C and D, you realize that they are likely to go together. How? Of gradual change is not in itself evidence of. So it makes sense, something is not in itself. So you can say that CUET exam is not in itself a difficult exam, right? So in itself makes sense that way. So you realize that if you look at C and D, it makes some sort of sense because it justifies the presence of in itself. It is interrupting as a sort of emphasis. Now this point is the absence of evidence of gradual change. So it goes like this: the absence of evidence, and evidence of what? Of gradual change is not in itself evidence of the absence of gradualism, right? So the absence of X is not in itself the absence of Y. This is what he is trying to say. So try to understand the logical meaning of the sentence. The author is trying to say that the absence of evidence in itself, so the absence of evidence of gradual change is not in itself evidence of the absence of gradualism. Just because we don't have evidence of gradual change doesn't mean that there is absence of gradualism, correct? So how do you start? You know that CD is a pair, and if you want to make sense of this, you should have something before this. So what is that? The absence of evidence of what? Of gradual change. So this becomes like this. B. So you say that the absence of evidence of gradual change is not in itself evidence of the absence of. So slightly tricky, which can come first, but this is how it is. The absence of evidence of gradual change is not in itself evidence of the absence of gradualism. So this is basically a little complicated, but I hope you have understood this, how it works. And most of the time sentence arrangement can be very simple. Of course, you will have options in the exam, but before you look at the options, just try to read all the sentences or the fragments of the sentence and try connecting the pairs, and you'll automatically realize that this is the best flow, and then to look at the options, and the one that is representing that flow likely to be the right choice. This is basically the way we have to attempt these kind of questions. That was all to it. Thanks a lot for participating, and you can watch the other videos, the other live sessions. We have GK live session as well tomorrow. Thanks a lot.